1944. A soldier drifts alone in the vast Pacific, fighting hunger, fear, and the endless waves. Days later, he reaches a mysterious island and meets a nun who has been hiding from a deadly war. Two strangers, trapped in isolation, their survival depending on each other. Before we dive in, tell us in the comments, where in the world are you watching? The wind howled like a wounded beast over the endless ocean. Captain Daniel Hayes clung to a half-broken raft, his hands blistered, lips cracked from salt and thirst. For days he had floated through grey waves, surrounded by nothing but the memory of war, the fire, the screams, the faces of his men swallowed by the sea. He had stopped praying long ago. He believed God had stopped listening to soldiers. A pale dawn rose from the horizon. Through the mist, Daniel saw something that almost looked unreal. An island, shrouded in fog, silent except for the cries of distant seabirds. With the last of his strength, he paddled toward it. Each wave felt heavier than the last. When his raft finally scraped against the sand, he collapsed face down, unconscious. When he opened his eyes again, he smelled smoke. Soft, fragrant, like burning herbs. He lay on a rough wooden cot beneath a roof made of woven palm leaves. A gentle voice whispered, "You're safe now." Standing beside him was a woman dressed in a faded grey habit, her face calm, eyes bright with kindness. "Rest," she said. "You're among friends." Daniel tried to sit up. Pain struck his ribs. "Where am I?" "You're on St. Elora Island," she replied softly. "I'm Sister Evelyn Grace." He looked around. The place looked like a small chapel, half-ruined, vines curling over its stone walls, candles flickering beside a wooden cross. "You live here?" "Alone," she nodded. "Since the storm took our priest, I stayed to tend the chapel and pray for those who are lost." "Pray?" Daniel almost laughed. "There's no one left to hear prayers." Her smile didn't fade. "Then I'll pray louder." For a moment silence hung between them, the silence of two souls from opposite worlds. She offered him a bowl of warm broth made from roots and herbs. He took it reluctantly, but finished every drop. Hunger defeated pride. That night rain beat against the chapel roof. Daniel lay awake, listening to Evelyn's voice as she murmured prayers in Latin. Her calmness irritated him at first. How could she still believe after so much suffering? But the steady rhythm of her words felt strangely comforting. Exhausted, he drifted to sleep. The next morning, he woke to sunlight spilling through broken windows. Evelyn was outside, gathering fallen coconuts beneath tall palms. Her sleeves were rolled up, her hands covered in soil. Daniel watched for a moment, surprised by her strength. She wasn't fragile like he imagined nuns to be. She worked like someone who had made peace with hardship. He limped outside. "You shouldn't be here alone," he said. "This place isn't safe. Safety doesn't live on earth," she answered quietly. "Only courage does." Together they gathered fruit and rainwater. Daniel built a small fire near the chapel. When Evelyn saw him cut a branch to use as a spear for fishing, she frowned. "You shouldn't kill creatures of God," he smirked. "God's not the one starving." Hours later, Daniel returned with a few fish. He roasted them on the fire and handed one to her. She hesitated but took a small bite. "It's been months," she whispered. "I almost forgot what salt tastes like." As the day faded, Daniel asked, "Why did you stay here?" "You could have escaped." Evelyn's eyes dimmed with memory. "I came here with Father Mateo. We were searching for missing villagers taken by soldiers. But before we could reach them, disease struck. He didn't survive. I buried him under the old banyan tree and prayed someone would come. But no one ever did." Daniel stared at the fire. "Then why keep believing? Your God left you here to die." She looked up at the sky painted with orange clouds. "Faith isn't about being rescued, Captain. It's about not losing yourself while you wait." He said nothing. The ocean murmured in the distance like a restless ghost. For the first time since the war began, Daniel felt something unfamiliar, peace mixed with confusion. Days passed. They settled into a fragile routine. Evelyn prayed at dawn. Daniel repaired his raft, though he knew it wouldn't float far. He began exploring the island, a mixture of jungle and cliffs. He found broken huts, rusted helmets, and old bullet shells. The island had seen war before. One afternoon, while Daniel was cutting bamboo near the shore, he heard the faint drone of an aircraft. He froze. "Evelyn!" he called. She ran to him, eyes wide with fear. Overhead, a dark plane swept across the sky, a Japanese fighter. They hid under thick foliage as the plane circled once, then vanished beyond the clouds. Evelyn trembled. Daniel put a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "They didn't see us," he whispered. But his heart pounded with dread. That night, thunder rolled across the sea. Evelyn lit candles inside the chapel. "If they return, we must hide in the caves on the East Ridge," Daniel said. "You speak as if war follows you," she murmured. "It does. It never lets go." Lightning flashed, illuminating her face, calm yet sad. "Maybe God brought you here for a reason," she said. He shook his head. "No, God doesn't care about men like me." Evelyn didn't argue. She simply handed him a dry cloth to cover his shoulders. "Then let me care, until you believe he does." For the first time in years, Daniel felt tears burn his eyes. He turned away quickly, ashamed. In the following days, he helped Evelyn strengthen the chapel walls and dig a small garden. The work gave him purpose. Sometimes he caught her humming hymns while planting seeds. Her voice carried through the wind like a soft echo of hope. He didn't understand her faith, but he couldn't deny its warmth. One morning, they walked along the cliffs searching for fruit. Daniel stopped suddenly, spotting something in the distance, a trail of smoke rising from the north end of the island. "Campfire," he muttered. They moved closer through the trees until they saw them. 3 enemy soldiers setting up equipment near the shore. Evelyn gasped softly. Daniel pulled her behind a rock. "Don't move," he whispered. Fear tightened her throat. "What will we do?" "We stay quiet. We hide. If they find us, it's over." They retreated silently toward the chapel. The presence of soldiers changed everything. Daniel's instincts returned, sharp, alert, trained by war. But alongside that fear, he felt something new: responsibility. Not for himself, but for her. That evening, as rain began to fall again, Evelyn knelt beside the altar, whispering prayers for safety. Daniel watched her, torn between disbelief and admiration. She had no weapon, no army, yet her courage outshone his rifle. When he finally lay down to rest, he heard her voice in the dark. "Captain Hayes, when morning comes, we'll find a new shelter. I know God will show us a way." He closed his eyes and murmured, "If he does, I'll thank him myself." Outside, the wind softened. The ocean sighed against the rocks. Inside the broken chapel, 2 lost souls, one of war, one of faith, waited for the dawn that might save or destroy them. Morning arrived wrapped in mist, soft and silver. The island looked peaceful, but Daniel's instincts whispered danger. He stood near the edge of the jungle, scanning the distant shore where he had seen smoke the day before. Nothing moved now, no sound but the endless hiss of waves. Yet he knew soldiers didn't vanish. They waited. Evelyn stepped beside him, holding a basket of fruits she had gathered. "You haven't eaten," she said gently. Daniel shook his head. "Can't eat. Not when I don't know who's out there." She set the basket down and looked toward the horizon. "Fear feeds on what we can't see," she murmured. "But so does faith." Her calm voice both irritated and soothed him. "Faith won't stop bullets, sister," he said. "No," she replied, "but it keeps you human enough not to become one." For a while, neither spoke. The waves crashed, the wind sighed through the palms. Then Evelyn said quietly, "There's a cave on the eastern ridge. If they return, we can hide there." Daniel nodded. "Show me." The path wound through thick ferns and mossy stones. It took them an hour to reach the cliffs. Beneath a wall of black rock, half hidden by vines, they found a narrow cave opening. Inside, the air was cool and damp, the ground soft with old leaves. "This could work," Daniel said, inspecting the space. "We can build a fire here if we keep it low. Smoke won't escape." Evelyn touched the cave wall with her fingertips. "It feels like the earth's heartbeat," she whispered. Daniel looked at her, almost smiling. "You find poetry in everything," she turned to him. "And you find reasons to stop believing. Maybe that's why we're both still alive, to balance the other." Her words stayed with him. That night, they moved what little food and supplies they had from the chapel to the cave. The old stone church now stood abandoned, candles flickering in silence. Before leaving, Evelyn knelt before the altar one last time, tracing the cross on her chest. "This isn't goodbye," she whispered, "just another chapter." When they returned to the cave, Daniel set traps near the entrance using vines and sticks, silent alarms that would rustle if anyone approached. He also crafted crude spears from bamboo. Evelyn watched him with quiet curiosity. "You were a soldier before all this," she said. He nodded. "Captain in the Marine Corps. I've seen more death than I care to count." "Then perhaps this island is your mercy," she said softly. He frowned. "Mercy?" "Yes, a place to rest the part of you that keeps fighting ghosts." Daniel looked away. "I don't rest, sister. I survive." The following days were tense. They avoided the northern shore, where the soldiers had been spotted. Daniel taught Evelyn how to fish with a net made from torn parachute fabric he found near the beach. She surprised him with her determination, falling into the rhythm of survival as if she'd been trained for it. They worked in silence most of the time, their bond deepening not through words but through shared struggle. One afternoon, as the tide went out, Evelyn slipped on a wet rock and scraped her ankle badly. Daniel rushed to her, tearing a strip from his shirt to bandage the wound. She winced but didn't cry out. "You're tougher than half my platoon," he said, trying to lighten the mood. She smiled faintly. "God gives strength where it's needed." He looked at her bleeding foot. "Maybe next time he could give balance instead." She laughed softly, the sound echoing across the shore. It was the first genuine laughter Daniel had heard in months. It startled him how much it warmed the cold corners of his heart. That night he shared more of his past, how he had grown up in a cold orphanage, how he joined the army to escape emptiness. "War gave me purpose," he said quietly, "but it also took everything good I ever had." Evelyn listened in silence. When he finished, she said, "You didn't lose it. You just buried it under survival." He stared at the flickering flame. "And you, sister? Why this life? Why the vows, the robe, the solitude?" She hesitated, her eyes distant. "I was an orphan too. I wanted to belong to something larger than my pain. When I found faith, I found peace, or thought I did. But sometimes I wonder if faith without purpose is as lost as a soldier without war." He met her gaze. For the first time, he saw not a nun, but a woman carrying her own scars. They were both prisoners, one of war, one of devotion. Days bled into nights. Food grew scarce. Daniel began hunting small crabs and fish near the reef. Evelyn foraged for edible plants she remembered from the missionary books. Together they kept each other alive. Once when he returned from fishing, he found her sitting by the cave entrance, praying softly. He didn't want to disturb her, but she opened her eyes and said, "Sit." He sat beside her, unsure why. "Do you believe in anything, Captain?" she asked. "I believe in staying alive," he replied. "That's not belief. That's instinct." He looked at her, eyes tired but honest. "Maybe belief died with the first man I lost out there." Evelyn nodded slowly. "Then maybe belief is waiting to be born again." Something in her voice cracked open a forgotten part of him. He didn't answer, but that night, as rain whispered over the cave roof, he whispered his first prayer in years, just 4 words. "If you're still there." The next morning brought dread. Distant voices echoed from the jungle, Japanese soldiers searching the island. Daniel motioned for silence. They crouched in the shadows as the sounds grew closer. Through the leaves, he glimpsed boots, rifles, and the glint of metal helmets. The soldiers spoke in sharp tones, then moved away. Evelyn's hand trembled slightly, but she didn't scream. When the danger passed, she exhaled shakily. Daniel whispered, "They'll be back. What will we do?" "Move at night, stay hidden during the day, and pray they don't find us." Evelyn's lips curved in a faint smile. "You said pray, that's a start." He rolled his eyes, but couldn't hide a grin. "Don't make it sound like a miracle." The days that followed tested their endurance. Rain soaked their firewood, forcing them to eat raw coconuts and crabs. Evelyn grew weaker. Daniel spent nights awake, watching over her. His hands, once made for war, now built shelters, caught food, protected life instead of taking it. One evening, while gathering rainwater, he noticed something shiny buried near the cliffs, a rusted metal box. He pried it open and found old rations, a flare gun, and a torn map labeled St. Alora Base, evacuated. He hurried back to the cave. "Evelyn, look." "Supplies!" She smiled with relief. "Maybe this is Providence. Maybe it's luck," he said, but his voice lacked conviction. Somewhere deep inside, he wanted to believe her version. That night they shared a rare feast of dried meat and biscuits. It felt almost like normal life. Evelyn lit a candle and hummed a hymn softly. Daniel watched her face in the warm glow. Her hair, slightly undone from days of wind, caught the light like a halo. Something stirred inside him, something he didn't want to name. "You miss your world," he said quietly. "I miss the sound of bells," she admitted. "Back home, the church bells rang every sunrise. They reminded me that light always returns." He nodded slowly. "Maybe that's why I'm still here." "Waiting for light," Evelyn looked at him. "Perhaps it already found you." Outside, the storm eased. The stars appeared, scattered and fragile above the Black Sea. For a long time they sat in silence, two lost souls breathing the same fragile peace. Then Daniel whispered, "If we make it out of here, what will you do?" "Go wherever I'm needed," she said softly. "And you?" He stared at the horizon. "Maybe find what I was fighting for." Her hand brushed against his. Neither pulled away. The moment was pure, wordless, a bond born from fear and faith. But the island had its own plans. The next morning, the distant rumble of engines shattered the calm. The enemy had returned in greater numbers. Evelyn's face paled. Daniel stood, heart pounding. "They've set up camp. They'll comb the island." He gripped his rifle, the metal cold against his skin. For the first time, he wasn't afraid of dying, he was afraid of losing her. "We'll survive this," he said firmly. "I promise." Evelyn met his eyes. "Then I'll hold you to your word, Captain." As thunder rolled again over St. Alora, the two fugitives retreated into the depths of the cave, carrying with them not just the weight of survival, but the fragile spark of something greater than either had known before. Faith reborn in the heart of a soldier, and courage awakened in the soul of a nun. As the sun dipped behind the jagged cliffs, the sky turned a deep crimson, the same color Daniel had seen too many times on the battlefield. He sat quietly by the old chapel's broken window, his arm wrapped in bandages Sister Evelyn had torn from her own robe. The faint sound of waves crashing against the shore echoed through the silence, but Daniel's mind was elsewhere, trapped in memories he wished he could forget. Evelyn entered quietly, carrying a small wooden bowl of boiled roots and seaweed. "You should eat," she said softly, setting it beside him. "You need strength, Captain." He gave a faint smile. "You still call me that," he said, "even when there's no army left to command." She sat beside him, folding her hands in her lap. "A title doesn't define the man. Your courage does." For the first time in weeks, Daniel laughed, a quiet, broken sound. "Courage?" he repeated. "I wasn't brave, sister. I survived because others didn't. That's not courage. That's luck." Evelyn turned to face him. "And yet you still saved me when I was surrounded by soldiers that night. You carried me across the jungle when you could barely walk yourself. That wasn't luck, Daniel. That was grace." Her words hung in the air like a prayer. He looked at her, really looked at her. And for the first time, he saw more than the nun's habit, more than the symbol of faith. He saw a woman who had lost as much as he had. And yet, she still chose hope. Later that night, a storm rolled in from the sea. Lightning flashed, revealing the shadow of a Japanese patrol boat far off the coast. Daniel's instincts returned instantly. He knew what that meant. They would soon be discovered. "We have to leave," he whispered urgently. "They'll find us here." Evelyn shook her head. "This island is the only refuge for miles. We can't run forever." Daniel's jaw tightened. "Then we make a stand." He began gathering what little they had. An old rifle with a single bullet, a flare gun, and a few makeshift traps he had built over the weeks. Evelyn watched him, torn between fear and faith. "Violence won't save us," she said. "It's not about saving us," he replied. "It's about giving you a chance." That night, rain poured endlessly. The jungle became a blur of motion, thunder, wind, the whisper of soldiers moving through the trees. Daniel led Evelyn deep into the old monastery's catacombs beneath the chapel. The walls were damp, filled with the scent of decay and time. He turned to her. "Stay here. No matter what happens, don't come out." "Daniel," she began, but he placed a trembling hand on her shoulder. "I've spent my whole life taking orders," he said, "but this time I'm choosing." Her eyes glistened with tears as he stepped away, disappearing into the storm. She clasped her rosary tightly, whispering prayers that vanished into the sound of thunder. Outside, Daniel moved like a shadow among the ruins. He set fire to the brush near the shore to draw attention, firing the flare gun into the sky. The red light burst above the island like a dying star. Moments later, gunfire erupted. The Japanese. Soldiers stormed toward the flames, unaware of the traps waiting in the darkness. Explosions echoed across the jungle, and Evelyn, still hidden below, fell to her knees. "God," she whispered, "protect him." Hours passed before the storm began to fade. The silence that followed was heavier than the thunder had been. Evelyn climbed out, her heart pounding. Smoke rose from the eastern ridge. She called his name once, twice, but there was no answer. Then, faintly, she heard a cough. She ran toward the sound and found Daniel lying near the broken altar, his body covered in mud and blood, but alive. "Barely. You came back," he murmured weakly as she knelt beside him. "I told you," she whispered, tears falling freely now. "Faith doesn't run." Daniel tried to smile, his breathing ragged. "Maybe you were right. Maybe he never left me after all." Evelyn held his hand as dawn broke, light spilling across the horizon like a promise. For the first time since the war began, the island felt alive again. And though the world around them was still broken, in that moment, two lost souls had finally found their peace. The days after the storm passed like whispers through eternity. The island, once haunted by fear, now stood still, washed clean by rain and sacrifice. The chapel's bell tower had fallen, yet inside its ruins, faith had begun to rebuild itself. Sister Evelyn tended to Daniel's wounds with quiet devotion, her hands trembling not from fear, but from something deeper, the realization that she no longer saw him as a soldier, but as a soul redeemed. Daniel, weak but alive, would often wake to find her praying beside him. At first, he thought it was for his survival. But one morning, when the light fell across her face, he realized she wasn't praying for him. She was praying with him. The difference was everything. "I never thought I'd live to see peace," he whispered one dawn, watching the ocean's calm surface shimmer like glass. "Every time I close my eyes, I still hear the explosions." Evelyn looked up from her prayer. "Peace isn't the absence of war, Daniel," she said softly. "It's learning to live again after it ends." He smiled faintly. "You sound like a poet." She shook her head with a shy laugh. "No, just a woman who's seen too much pain." They sat in silence for a long while, the kind of silence that speaks louder than words. Every sunrise seemed to stitch another wound closed between them. Slowly, Daniel began walking again, leaning on a carved wooden staff Evelyn had found among the ruins. His limp was permanent, but so was his resolve. One evening, as they gathered what little remained of their supplies, a distant hum filled the air. Daniel froze. It wasn't thunder this time. It was the familiar drone of engines. He looked toward the horizon and saw them, American planes, circling low over the island. His heart pounded. Rescue had come. Evelyn's eyes widened, both in relief and sorrow. "You can go home now," she whispered. He turned to her, the weight of her words pressing heavily on his chest. "And you?" "This is my home," she said quietly, looking at the chapel. "I vowed to serve wherever God placed me. Maybe he brought me here for you." And now my work is done. Daniel's throat tightened. You saved me, Evelyn. You gave me more than my life back. You gave me faith, and you gave me courage, she replied, her voice barely a whisper. We both found what we had lost. Moments later, a rescue team landed near the shore. Daniel was helped aboard the small transport boat, but his eyes never left the figure standing at the edge of the beach. The woman in white, her habit fluttering in the ocean wind, a silent guardian of lost souls. She lifted a hand in farewell, and Daniel felt something inside him break, not from pain, but from gratitude too vast for words. As the boat drifted away, he clutched a small wooden cross Evelyn had pressed into his hand before he left. It was rough, handmade, and imperfect, but it felt like hope. He held it against his chest as the island disappeared into the mist. Years later, back in New York, Daniel sat alone in a quiet church pew. His uniform was long gone, replaced by the ordinary clothes of a man who had learned to live. He reached into his pocket, pulled out that same wooden cross, and placed it on the altar. The candles flickered gently, and he whispered, "You were right, sister. He never left me." As he stood there, the church doors opened. A group of children entered with a young nun leading them, her voice kind, her presence radiant. For a moment, Daniel saw Evelyn's spirit in her, the same calm strength, the same faith. He smiled softly. Outside, snow began to fall, pure, silent, and eternal. Daniel stepped into the cold evening air, the city lights glowing like stars. For the first time in a long time, he felt at peace. Not because the war was over, but because the battle within him finally was. He looked up at the sky, eyes glistening, and murmured, "Thank you, Evelyn, for teaching me to believe again."